Have you ever felt unstoppable, like you were on the path to greatness, only to suddenly fall off track? Maybe it was a mistake you made, a distraction that pulled you away, or even a moment of weakness. But what if I told you that even in your lowest moments, God is still working, still calling you to something greater? Today, we're diving into the story of Samson, a man of immense strength, chosen by God, yet brought down by distractions. His story is a powerful reminder that no matter how far we fall, God can still use us for greatness. Samson's story begins even before he was born. His parents were visited by an angel who told them that their son would be set apart from birth, destined to lead Israel out of the hands of the Philistines. Samson was chosen by God, and from the beginning, his life had a purpose. His strength wasn't just physical, it was tied to a promise, a covenant with God. His uncut hair was a symbol of that covenant, a reminder of the source of his strength, God. From an early age, Samson displayed extraordinary power. He tore a lion apart with his bare hands, defeated entire armies of Philistines, and was feared by his enemies. But despite his strength, Samson had a weakness. He became distracted by the things of this world. He was called to lead, to deliver Israel, but he was drawn away by his desires. One of those distractions came in the form of a woman named Delilah. Delilah wasn't just any woman. She represented everything that could pull Samson away from his calling. The Philistines, desperate to defeat Samson, offered her wealth if she could discover the secret to his strength. Time and time again, she tried to uncover the source of his power. And time again, Samson misled her. But eventually, he gave in. He revealed that his strength came from his uncut hair, his covenant with God. And in that moment of vulnerability, Samson lost sight of who he was and who had given him his strength. How many times have we, like Samson, allowed distractions to pull us away from our calling? How many times have we forgotten that our talents, our gifts, our success come from God, and instead placed our trust in things that cannot sustain us? Delilah may have been a person in Samson's life, but for us, Delilah could be anything that draws our focus away from the path God has set for us. It could be the pursuit of wealth, relationships, recognition, or even fear and doubt. When Samson revealed the secret of his strength, he wasn't just revealing the source of his power. He was revealing that he had forgotten who he owed that power to. His hair was cut and his strength left him. The Philistines captured him, gouged out his eyes, and made him a slave. It seemed like Samson's story was over. He was no longer the mighty warrior who had struck fear in the hearts of his enemies. He was broken, humiliated, a shell of the man he once was. But even in his darkest moment, God wasn't done with Samson. Even after his failure, even after he had given in to distraction, God's plan for Samson's life was still unfolding. You see, God doesn't give up on us when we fall. Even when we stray, when we lose sight of our purpose, when we forget where our strength comes from, God is still working. And God was still working in Samson. Samson's hair began to grow again, and with it, his strength returned. But this time, Samson had learned something. His strength wasn't about him. It wasn't about what he could do. His strength came from God, and without God, he was nothing. In his final act, Samson asked God for one more moment of strength. He stood between the pillars of the Philistine temple, surrounded by his enemies, and with all his might, he pushed the pillars apart, collapsing the building and defeating more Philistines in his death than he had in his entire life. What can we learn from Samson's story? First, we must remember that our gifts, our talents, our success, all of it comes from God. It is easy to become distracted, to believe that we have achieved greatness on our own, but when we forget the source of our strength, we are vulnerable. Samson's strength wasn't just physical, it was tied to his relationship with God, and when he lost sight of that, he lost everything. Second, we must be mindful of the Delilahs in our lives, the distractions, the temptations, the things that pull us away from God's calling. Samson was called to be a leader, a deliverer, but he allowed himself to be led astray. We too are called to a purpose, and we must be vigilant, guarding our hearts and our minds from the things that seek to pull us away from that purpose. And finally, Samson's story teaches us that even when we fall, even when we make mistakes, God can still use us. Samson's failure didn't disqualify him from God's plan. In fact, God used Samson's final act to fulfill the purpose for which he was born, to deliver Israel from the Philistines. In the same way, our mistakes do not disqualify us from God's plan. God can redeem even our greatest failures and use them for His glory. Maybe today, you feel like Samson in his final moments, weak, broken, and far from the person you were called to be. Maybe you've allowed distractions to pull you away from your purpose. Maybe you've forgotten the source of your strength. But let me tell you, God isn't done with you yet. Just as He restored Samson, He can restore you. He can give you the strength to overcome, to rise above the distractions, and to step back into the calling He has placed on your life. Think about your own life. What are the Delilahs that have distracted you from your purpose? What are the things that have caused you to forget where your strength comes from? Maybe it's the pursuit of success, the desire for approval, or the weight of past mistakes. But today, you can choose to refocus, to remember that everything you have, every talent, every gift, comes from God, and you can choose to give those distractions to Him, trusting that He will lead you back to the path He has set for you. Samson's story is a powerful reminder that we are never too far gone for God to use us. We are never too broken for God to restore. No matter what distractions we've allowed into our lives, no matter how far we've strayed from our calling, God's grace is greater, His power is greater, and His plan for your life is still unfolding. So what will you do today? Will you continue to let the distractions hold you back? Or will you, like Samson, call out to God for strength? Will you trust that He can use you, even with your mistakes? Will you remember that your strength comes from Him? In the comments below, share what distractions have pulled you away from your purpose. How has God reminded you of His strength in your life? We'd love to hear your story and walk this journey with you. And don't forget to subscribe for more encouragement and motivation as we continue to seek God's purpose for our lives. Samson's story isn't just about physical strength. It's about the strength that comes from a relationship with God. It's about recognizing that no matter how talented, how successful, how powerful we may be, we are nothing without Him. And it's about understanding that even when we fall short, God's grace is sufficient. He can use us, even in our weakness, to accomplish great things. So today, take a moment to reflect. Where have you placed your trust? In your own abilities, your own success, or in the God who gave you those gifts? And what distractions have kept you from fully walking in your purpose? Like Samson, we all face moments where we are tempted to rely on ourselves, to forget the source of our strength. But like Samson, we can choose to turn back to God, to ask for His strength, and to step into the greatness He has prepared for us. God has called you for a purpose, and He is not done with you. He hasn't given up on you, no matter what mistakes you've made. Your strength, your gifts, your success, they all come from Him. And just like Samson, you were created to do great things, to make an impact, to fulfill a purpose that only you can fulfill. So don't let the distractions keep you from that calling. Don't forget where your strength comes from. God is calling you today. He's calling you to remember who you are, who He created you to be. He's calling you to refocus, to realign with His purpose for your life. Will you answer that call?